Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the anatomy of a canjo. What makes it up? What are the parts? What are the things that you'll need to know both for playing and potentially for building one? We'll start up here at the top of the neck. This is the top, and then the bottom would be where the can is. At the very top of the neck is what we call the tuner. This is what the string wraps around. It's also known as a machine head. It's what allows you to change the tension of the string. And there's usually a hole of some sort drilled for the tuner that the tuner shaft extends through. Then down from that is, we generally will use a round-headed screw as what on a guitar would be called the nut. It basically, the string comes up and over this little screw to give it the right height as it proceeds down the neck. Of course, this wooden piece that is basically the structure or the frame of the canjo is what we call the neck. On the neck are mounted frets, which are pieces of specially shaped metal wire that divide the neck very carefully according to a mathematical formula that allow different notes to be played when the next item, the string, is pushed down at different locations on the neck. The string can be a thin, unwound or plain steel string, like would be the higher pitched strings on a standard guitar, or it can be a larger wound string, which would be like the larger strings on a guitar. Generally, the canjos that we build will have the smaller plain steel strings because we feel that the higher pitch sounds project better, resonate with the can better. Here at the bottom of the frets or below the frets, we will usually sand in a picking groove, which gives you a place to strike the string without hitting the neck. Then at the bottom of the instrument is the can, and as we've talked about, there are a variety of different cans that can be used, so everyone will look a little bit different. It is attached to the neck in various ways, whether it sits on top of the neck like this one does, or is suspended in the middle. And then at the very bottom of the instrument is where the string, the base of the string, the ball end of the string attaches. And there'll usually be another screw of some sort there holding it on. So that is the anatomy of what makes up a canjo. Now, if there is a standard canjo, at least at the American Canjo Company here, it is a one-string, diatonically fretted neck. But it is, of course, possible, and we have built two-string canjos. Theoretically, you could have any number of strings on it and still call it a canjo. The name canjo, of course, is a derivation of banjo, and a standard banjo has 5 strings, so your options are pretty open there. But if there's a standard, at least for us, it's a single string, diatonically fretted or dulcimer-style fretted neck. Now, I'd like to talk for a moment. I've mentioned the term diatonic or dulcimer fretting quite a few times already, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what that means. Basically, if you think of a standard guitar, the frets, which are these wire pieces mounted into the neck, the frets on a standard guitar go up the neck and are evenly spaced, each one getting a little bit closer together until they're quite close together up here at the top of the neck. Now, on a dulcimer, which uses diatonic fretting, some of those frets are left out. If you can see on this neck, there are gaps where on a guitar other frets would be. And the reason you do this is to basically get rid of all the sharps and flats and make it easier to play, and you end up with whole notes, what I call whole notes left. And a good way to think of whole notes would be the do, re, mi scale. So if you think in your head of how a do, re, mi would go, and I'm going to play that on this canjo. So I went right up the scale, hitting each fret except for one here, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I played what we'll call the do, re, mi scale of whole notes. There were no sharps or flats, nothing sounded weird or off. And that's basically done to make the instrument easier to play. It does limit you in some ways because you can't play in as many different keys or with much variety as you can on a chromatically fretted instrument, which is what a standard guitar would be. Basically, chromatically fretted means it has every one of the half steps that make up the chromatic scale, whereas the diatonic only has whole steps or full steps that make up the diatonic scale. Now we'll be talking about this more when we get to the how to play section of the video, but there is one extra fret that we add on to our American Canjo Company canjos, and we call it the blue note or the blue fret. And basically what it does is it extends the capabilities of the instrument just a little bit so that you can get a little bit more bluesy sound in some songs. That's why we call it the blue note. And it also actually lets you play in two different keys on the canjo, which extends the versatility of the instrument. So if I go up the fretboard and hit every note, see if you can hear where the blue note comes in. Do you hear how we're going up the scale of do, re, mi, and we hit one that isn't really on that scale? Well, that's the blue note. And basically what that lets you do is if I start from the open string, if I go up the scale and I skip that blue note, so I'd go, according to our tablature notation, which starts with the open string as 0, I would go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. That gives me the full do, re, mi scale. Now if instead I start from the third string, or I'm sorry, the third fret, I would go 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and back down. So starting there, I can play another do, re, mi scale a little bit higher, and then I'm skipping the 6th or the 7th fret instead of the 6th. So don't worry about it too much now. Just know that having that extra fret in there makes it possible to play a much wider range of songs on the canjo. Now I would like to talk about the strings that we use on the canjos. Generally, the ones that we build here at the American Canjo Company, the standard models, if you want to call them that, will use a fairly thin, low-gauge, plain steel or unwound guitar string. The most common size we use is a 12-gauge plain steel string, 0.012 inches or 12/1000ths of an inch. Generally, this would be the high E string out of a standard guitar set. And it can vary a little bit. You know, you could use an 11 or a 10, or you could use a 13 or a 14. And generally, it will be tuned up to a high D note, somewhere in the range of high D. I'm not exactly sure where this one is at the moment. Really, you don't have to worry about what it's tuned to unless you're going to be playing with other people. If you're just going to be picking along by yourself, just get it to where the string isn't too loose, isn't too tight, and have fun with it. Now, you can theoretically use pretty much any size string on a canjo. We find that the smaller unwound plain steel strings tend to ring better, they get the can to resonate better, but it is possible to use larger strings. This is a 42 gauge, 0.042 phosphor bronze wound string. This would be in the range of the low A note, or the low A string on a standard guitar. And they work just fine. They put a little more tension on the neck, and in our experience, they don't get the can to really ring as well, but they do work. So you can hear how that's a much lower, bassier sound than if I play the same thing with the smaller unwound string. it's worth experimenting with, finding what you like or what sound seems to work best with the can that you have. But for the most part, the ones we build have the smaller, unwound plain steel strings.